Welcome. It's good to be with you again. I want to give you this video for the purpose of reviewing your final exam, briefly talking through your critical assignment, as well as showing you how to get to the course evaluation. So as you can see, we'll just go ahead and get started. I'm on the home page of our course, CST 100, as it says right here. And so CST 100, Overview of the Bible. And so if you go to your home page of our course and click on syllabus, we'll talk through a little bit of the critical assignment. And so as we get here on the syllabus, I'm going to scroll down. And while we're on our way, just will remind you of some of the grading that I've mentioned in emails already this week. You can see the weekly quizzes, the study questions, the sermon reflections, which we've finished all of those. Well, you have one more study question next week, week 8, and then the final and the critical assignment. And you can see with the point total of 1,000 for the entire course that the final exam and the critical assignment are 300 of those 1,000 points. So that's 30% of your grade. And so that's one of the reasons I've encouraged you to keep up with your work as we've gone along, because that's 30% that you're going to submit next week. But any of these that you've missed, and let me again reiterate on the email, yes, you'll have points reduced for turning in your assignments late, but if you will get any of your study questions or sermon reflections that you have not submitted turned into me this week, I will give you partial credit. And when you're adding up numbers, I know this isn't a math class, but when you're adding up numbers, any points are better than a 0. And so would encourage you that if there are any of the study questions or sermon reflections that you have not completed, that those can impact your grade. Even if you get them in late, I'll give you partial credit. So let's scroll back up to the critical assignment, which is the storyline of the Bible. So you need to write a 6-page paper in which you summarize the storyline of the Bible from Genesis to Revelation. Now, obviously, Robert's book, that's what Robert's book is all about, but you only have 6 pages. And so what you need to do, as the assignment says here, given the constraints, you need to discern which details that you're going to include. And so just want to walk through this, a central thesis about the big picture of the Bible. In other words, in one statement or in a couple of sentences at the most, what would you say is the big picture of the Bible? And, Roberts talks about that, God's people living under God's plan in God's land and knowing his blessing, those 4 aspects. That's his central thesis going through his book. But in a sentence or two, what would you, or how would you summarize the big picture of the Bible? And so get that on paper first, and then from that include major stories in the Bible, major characters in the Bible, major events in the Bible, and especially putting them, as it says right here, in an order or with a reference point to dates or order or timeline fashion, even though it's got to be written in a paper form, in sentence fashion of how those things all led to another, how they interacted, how they played together to reveal what your thesis is. And so whatever your thesis is of the big picture of the Bible, that's where you need to start. So work on that sentence or two that would summarize your theme or your thesis of what the big picture of the Bible is. And then as you go back through, and again, I would encourage you to use Robert's book because he does that, but he does it obviously in a whole lot more space and number of pages than you're allowed to use. And then using the major events, people, and places in the Bible, and the major sections of the Bible. Obviously, don't leave out the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. Make sure you distinguish in how those fit into whatever your thesis is. And so the key to this whole assignment is going to be getting a sentence or two, maybe a paragraph at the most, of how you would describe what the big picture of the Bible is, and then fill in the rest of your paper with details of characters in the Bible, major stories or events that took place, and in regards to the Old Covenant and the New Covenant, the Old Testament, the New Testament, and how that all fits together. Let me also encourage you to make certain that you use, as you're instructed here, at least 5 scholarly sources. Wikipedia is not a scholarly source, in case you were wondering. The Bible itself, because that's what you're writing about, also doesn't count as one of your sources. So there's going to require a little bit of research. Robert's book, obviously, would be one of the scholarly sources you could use. And then it gives you the specific instructions down here about the font and the actual format that should include the bibliography of the sources that you use. And so with a little bit of research, I don't believe that'll be difficult to do either at the library or books such as Robert's that you can use in regards to at least five scholarly sources that you will cite. And those will be used to support when you use a scholarly source or when you use an outside source for a research paper. Those are used to support the statements that you're making. And so again, go back to that big picture. Even if you use Roberts or some other book as a help or as a basis for whatever your statement, your central thesis or theme is in regards to the big picture of the Bible, obviously that's one of your sources, and you would cite that, and then use those to help you, develop the details that you see are important. So it's really going to be, from your perspective, the big picture of the Bible that you see. And so as long as it's well written, well researched, and on some of your assignments to this point, I have referenced grammar and typos. This is a paper. This is a term project. This is a course paper, a critical assignment as it's defined. So please proofread, or please have somebody else proofread, because ongoing typos or grammatical errors will affect your grade. So I mentioned earlier in an email this week that if you would like to submit your rough draft to me, or even just your central thesis, if you'd like to submit that via email, just email it to me, and I'll be glad to make comments and help direct you in regards to writing this paper. And so, as always, don't hesitate to contact me if you have any other questions or concerns. I'm going to go back to the home page just to get that out of the way. And let me talk through. I actually have a copy of the exam, the final exam, right here in front of me. And so I just want to kind of talk through it. And as the syllabus mentioned, and we've already clicked out of the syllabus, but the final exam is going to include questions from your weekly quizzes. So one of the best ways to study for your final exam is to review your weekly quizzes, but there will also be an additional 15 questions or some additional questions that will be included on that as well from these last sections of the course. So just to kind of talk through it, what are some of the aspects of God's promises to Abraham? What are the primary Old Testament figures, events, or promises that the gospel writers use? You may remember that from some of the quizzes that Matthew and Mark and Luke and John used in a description of Jesus. Key Old Testament figures, events, and promises that you need to be aware of, again, in regards to Christ as the gospel writers use them. Old Testament, some of the Old Testament history that we've briefly gone over. What was the fundamental problem for Israel? The letters of First and Second Timothy and Titus. What are they called? If you remember, we named some of the different epistles, like the general epistles and the pastoral epistles and the Pauline epistles and the Johannine epistles. So First and Second Timothy and Titus are part of the Pauline epistles, but they had a specific name in regards to who they were written to. Also, in regards to the lecture, and this was on one of your previous quizzes about the book of Acts, being a fulfillment of Adam and Eve's mandate to be fruitful and multiply. In the book of Revelation, the imagery or some of the pictures that we saw, and you saw this from your early Roberts study questions, pictures in Revelation that would relate to the Garden of Eden, the judgments in Revelation, like the exile of Israel, and we didn't talk a lot about Revelation, but according to the book of Revelation, the judgments there echo the exile in Israel. The judgments in Revelation increase in intensity. In Paul's letter to the Galatians, what does the law mention? The two purposes of the law. What does Paul mention as the two purposes of the law? In the new covenant described in Jeremiah 31, and again, you saw this in some of your homework questions. In Jeremiah 31, the new covenant would be different from the old covenant. In what ways? And there's two of those listed. The harlot of Babylon mentioned in the book of Revelation. Again, the primary Old Testament descriptions, people or events that the gospel writers use. Isaiah's prophecy, if you remember, it was the longest of all the prophetic writings. And what periods did it cover? Pre-exilic, exilic, and post-exilic. The first 9 chapters of the book of Proverbs in regards to the two ladies mentioned, Lady Wisdom and Lady Folly. Let's see what else we have here. Ethical instructions that Paul gives in 1st and 2nd Corinthians. Again, a lot of these questions you're going to find on previous quizzes, and so it's material that you've already been exposed to. One of the 4 main acts in the Bible storyline. What are those? And you catch that from Robert's book. The letter of James through Jude are known as what? As I mentioned already, the general epistles. There's also another term we did not use, but they could also be considered the Catholic epistles, and the word Catholic just means universal in that regards. One of the key themes in John's letters is, assurance of salvation. And 2nd and 3rd John are extended theological treatise of 1st John, are real life applications of the teaching of 1st John. Again, you've seen some of these questions already in your quizzes. The letter of Jude is very similar to 2 Peter chapter 2. One of the primary concerns of 2 Peter being false teachers, and one of the main metaphors that Peter uses in 1 Peter from the Old Testament is the exiles. So that's kind of a brief walkthrough. I would encourage you to review your previous quizzes, and that and the information I just gave you pretty well covers your final exam. And so I want to just prep you and help prep you for that as well. The one other thing I wanted to cover on this recording is the course evaluation. And I've mentioned it in emails already, but let me encourage you, please fill out a course evaluation for a number of reasons. It helps me. It will help CBU in future references for future offerings of this course in regards to content, how it was presented, all those kinds of things that you'll get to give your input on, and obviously would benefit future students who would take this course when we can make adjustments based on constructive criticism. And so I would encourage you to do that. If you go to your home screen right here, you can click on Student Resources, and right here is Course Evaluation, and you can click on that, and when you click on that, you just fill it out. I think I mentioned in the email it is anonymous until after your final grades are posted, and so there's no way that you filling out a course evaluation will in any way be connected to the grade that you get. In fact, as I showed you on the syllabus already, your grade is basically going to be based on the work that you've committed out of 1,000 points. And so the grade is pretty mathematical, but your grade, I will submit your final grades before I will get the feedback from the course evaluations. So it will be anonymous in that aspect, that there'll be no impact directly related to the grade that you get for this course. And as I said already, the grades are pretty mathematical. If you want to just add up the numbers going across, you'll have a good idea of what your final grade will be. So as always, wanted to post this for your benefit, and hopefully you'll take to heart and finish strong. Again, if you can get your rough draft to me of your critical assignment and there's any way that I can help you, be glad to do that. And finish up any assignments that you have not turned in to this point. At least you'll get partial credit if they're beyond the due date. And then remember your week 7 assignments. And on week 8, let me again remind you, let's go to the learning activities for week 8. On week 8, everything is due except your final exam, as is listed right here, week 8, day 5. That's Friday, February 26th. So your final Roberts study questions, your final reading, your critical assignment, all of those things are due on week 8, day 5. That's February 26th. So if they're not submitted by that Friday, then they will be marked down for being late. And then your final exam, you can take your final exam anytime that week, but you have through Sunday. So in all of our previous weeks, Sunday's been the cutoff date for assignments due, but on this particular week, so that I can get the grading done and back to you on a short turnaround, that everything's due on you'll see there on day 5. And so encourage you to accomplish that as soon as you possibly can. Get it in by Friday of next week, and then remember to take your final exam. So I trust this has been helpful, and would again encourage you to not have any hesitation about contacting me if there's any other way that I can help you. I've enjoyed the interaction I've had with you and through through this course together, and so I want to help you and encourage you to finish strong. God bless you.